Stark. I build neat stuff. I got a great girl. And occasionally save the world. So why can't I sleep?
You elected me on a single platform. I will defend this country at all costs. The Mandarin must be stopped.
You don't know who I am. You'll never see me coming.
What are you going to do about these attacks?
The whole world's gonna be watching.
The question, where is Tony Stark?
Things are different now. I have to protect the one thing that I can't live without. That's you. Mr. Stark.
Today is the first day of what's left of your life. I'm gonna offer the choice. Do you want an empty life or a meaningful death?
You're not a man. You're nothing more than a maniac. I'm not afraid of you. No politics here. Just good old-fashioned revenge. We do need backup. That's your department. Here's my boys.
Everyone, and welcome to Geekfest Rants. My name is Carlos Perron, and here with me I have Steve Ivona. Say hi, Steve.
Hey, Carlos.
Today we are going to be tackling Iron Man 3. Now, this is one of the biggies of the summer. We have a whole bunch of potential blockbusters coming out, and this is definitely one of them. It's probably the first big one of the summer. There have been another couple of films here or there, but this is definitely the one that you could say the summer has officially started. Now, with Iron Man 3, we are continuing the Iron Man franchise. Not only is this something for comic book fans, but it's because of the success of Avengers, Captain America, Thor, and these other films. It's a very open film in terms of it grabs a lot of different types of audience. It's not just for comic book geeks. So this is the third time around for this particular brand of comic book hero. So Steve, tell me a little bit about how is this one a little different than the previous ones? You know, what's new with Tony on this one?
Well, it's partial adaptation of an Iron Man storyline, a fairly recent one called Extremis, and it deals with this new kind of armor that Tony has developed that he can sort of control with his mind, and he can summon it from wherever it is to put it on, so to speak. And the villain played by Guy Pearce, Aldrich Killian, is also part of this storyline, and it's, I would say, a fairly faithful adaptation of that storyline. And it also incorporates the classic Iron Man villain, the Mandarin, as played by Ben Kingsley. And I'm sure as the conversation goes on, we'll delve into how he's portrayed in the film.
Well, let's just say that off the bat, the subject matter of the Mandarin is something that is very spoiler heavy. And we are going to be talking about it in quite a bit. So let's just prep everybody for that.
Oh, yeah, without question. There's no point in having the conversation without it.
So go ahead, continue telling us about the plot.
Oh, okay. So the film also picks up after Avengers, and Tony Stark has obviously been profoundly affected by the experience that he had in Avengers, and he's having trouble sleeping, he's having panic attacks, and it's straining his relationship with Pepper, as played by Gwyneth Paltrow. And he's kind of in a bad place. And that's really where the story picks up. And, things come back to bite him in the ass, let's put it that way, from his past. And you see a flashback of him dealing with Killian and kind of dismissing him, in sort of an arrogant, nasty way. This is before he became Iron Man, before he sort of had that epiphany and became a better person.
Yeah, this was really cool because it kind of gives us a little bit of a reminder of what a jerk Tony used to be. And, we are able to see it through these flashbacks of actual, previous characters that we met before.
So, the story kind of goes from there in terms of not only you get the sense that Killian is a threat to him, but also there's this other parallel threat with the Mandarin, who is kind of portrayed as, I guess the best way to say it is, as like an Osama bin Laden kind of terrorist who is posing a threat to Iron Man. And you get the sense that he's the main villain of the piece and that Killian is the secondary villain, but that all gets turned on its head. I don't know if you want to go there yet, but that's really where he's at, at the beginning of the film.
Yeah, we're introduced to this character who's supposed to be kind of like a Bin Laden type of character, very shady, very out there, kind of rallying his troops, who is going to come after Tony. He's doing some stuff to get the attention of the world, especially the United States. But at a certain point, he now targets Tony. And I love the buildup that they had of this character, how they're creating this really nasty, nasty bad guy. But then when they flip it on its head and almost make him a comic relief kind of character, that completely turned me off, making me wish that they would have stayed with the original idea.
Well, you have the introduction of the concept of Extremis, and Killian comes back into the fold, trying to sell Pepper on this technology that he's created, which, he's selling it as a way of, helping veterans who, have lost limbs. And it's like this next generation or next leap in technology. And Pepper doesn't buy into it. You get the sense that he's not a good guy and that he has a bone to pick with Stark. And he has these agents who are kind of hovering around, and they catch the attention of Happy Hogan, who's played by Jon Favreau, former director of the Iron Man films, but he comes back as in sort of an extended cameo as an actor, which was nice to see. And he gets wrapped up in following these guys and, seeing what they're up to, and he's critically injured by them, and that's really what starts the ball rolling in terms of waking Tony up to this threat.
And Tony starts to realize that there's a player behind this whole thing, and Killian seems to be involved somehow.
Yeah. So Tony basically dares the Mandarin, who he thinks is behind all this, to come after him. And he does. And that's one of the best set pieces in the whole movie, is the attack on his house in Malibu. It's just incredible. And that's a great sort of intro to the way this new armor works, in terms of how he's able to save Pepper and then sort of help himself. It's just an incredible scene. But, it ends him up even after he saves Pepper and this other character, Maya, who has something to do with Killian and Extremis, and she's a former, fling of Tony's. So he ends up in Tennessee, where one of the bombings had occurred, because that's where he had programmed the armor to go. And he has this sort of interlude with a kid who helps him, get back on his feet. And I have to just say right here that this kid and this whole part of the movie could have really sunk the movie, because you just never know what you're going to get with kids. Yeah, and he was.
Oh, and he was great.
Yeah, absolutely. I thought they had great interplay, and he wasn't like some sappy little kid. And Tony kept being Tony. He was still that sort of,
Oh, he was his usual jerky self.
Yeah. And it worked.
Yeah, you're right. And here's what I like, the best thing about it is that, like you mentioned before, the kid is not this genius, because, there's always this temptation on films and television to turn the kids into the smartest people in the room. And in this film, the kid is not the brightest thing in town, but he's good with Tony. And like you mentioned before, the best thing I like is the fact that Tony doesn't ease up too much on his usual jerky self. He's condescending to the kid. He's kind of mean to the kid. He's insulting to the kid, but they kind of work off each other pretty well. The kid can kind of hold off his own without being this amazing, like a stand-up comedian type of personality. And I'm glad they went this way, because on the DVD, there's deleted scenes where there were additional interactions with this kid having to do with this whole bullying thing, where there's this kid that's always bothering him. And after a number of different scenes where you see that sort of thing, Tony helps him kind of rescue the bully. And it's almost like one of these forced, oh, you rescue the bully and now the bully becomes your friend, or the bully admires you, or the bully leaves you alone type of scenario, which is a very, cliche type of thing that they would normally do on a movie or a TV show. And I'm glad that they steered away from it. Don't go into the cliches. Stay with this edgy kind of different writing, which works best for Tony, especially for Tony.
Right. So that was enjoyable. And that, he gets back on his feet and he goes after the Mandarin. And, at the same time, the Iron Patriot is doing his thing and he's trying to also figure out what's going on. And he's being sent all over the world to, investigate or go after the Mandarin. And it's all, what you find out is that it's all smoke and mirrors with the Mandarin, that it's Killian who's behind everything. And here's where this is my only real criticism of the film, because I highly enjoyed it. But again, as a reader of the comic, as somebody who grew up with the comic, I was really pleased with, up until that point, with how they were portraying the Mandarin. He was a tough sell, because he's one of those characters who was created in the 60s, and he was kind of like a Fu Manchu type, and it just doesn't translate to modern times. It would come across as kind of racist.
Yeah, but this time around, at least at first, I think they were pulling it off. He was coming off right.
It was perfect.
There's no complaints about it.
Yeah, and I'm like, wow, they made it work. And, Ben Kingsley is a terrific actor. So really, I didn't have any doubts that it would work. So the reveal that he is just an actor paid by Killian to be sort of the face of all these terrorist acts.
And again, I'll say it again. It's almost a comic relief.
Yeah.
It's like, it's not even that he's seriously playing somebody else who's pretending to be somebody else. He's a slapsticky type of character. And it's like, what?
I know. And, I had hoped, as I was watching the film and I had heard I'll be the first to admit it, I spoiled myself before I saw the film, so I knew this was coming. Some people had made up these theories that, maybe it's a double bluff, that the Mandarin really is behind it all.
Yeah. That would have been great if, for example, he was pretending to be this actor and now he's back to being the Mandarin, do a switcheroo a second time.
Yes, but it just doesn't seem like that's the case. And if there's an Iron Man 4, and if they were to do that, I'd be very happy. But I just think that this was their one shot at him, and I think they seem pleased with it. The movie is a gigantic hit.
Well, one report, and again, this is all rumory type of stuff, is that Ben Kingsley apparently just finished, now this is a fact, he just finished shooting something small for Marvel. And what he filmed is one of these Marvel one-shots, these little mini movies that they put sometimes with other DVD releases, or at the end of another film or something like that, where the real Mandarin, again, played by Ben Kingsley, is very upset at what Killian and this actor had done to his name. So it kind of gives a little bit of hope that the real Mandarin, this character that they've been building up, is for real, and we will maybe see him once again in the future. But you're right. Either way, they're making tons of money on this.
So then once that happens, Killian becomes the villain of the piece, and he's good. And, from, I'd say, the last a half hour, 45 minutes of the film, it just becomes this nonstop sort of action, crazy set pieces.
Nonstop, yeah.
The scene on Air Force One is amazing.
Yes.
And then the Tony fighting his way out of the compound with Rhodey. It kind of goes to like those Shane Black buddy movies. You get that feel, that Lethal Weapon-y kind of feel, which was fine. And I like the chemistry between Don Cheadle and Robert Downey. Mm-hmm. Again, the last act of the film in the Miami shipyards with all the various armors.
That's the other thing. I'm not a comic book big fanboy like you are, but I never suspected that he had this whole army of suits, just, completely self-activated suits that he could just summon. I didn't know that was part of the plan.
Right. And I guess the new technology that allows him to, control the armors with his mind or summon the armors. I mean, it just made the whole end sequence incredible, just in terms of him changing between suits, controlling suits, getting Pepper into suits. It was mind-blowing. And it really kind of added something. You know, I was not a tremendous fan of Iron Man 2. It was decent, but I thought it really kind of lacked something. And this film, I thought, more than made up for it. My only real issue with it was the portrayal of the Mandarin and the reveal. But, you know, other than that, I really liked, you know, Shane Black's direction. I liked where they took the character. And it certainly didn't disappoint on that sort of blockbustery, you know, level.
Right.
You know, and Robert Downey, let's face it, I mean, he's the guy. He's the guy to play this character. He was born to play this character. It's going to be very interesting to see if Marvel is able to get him back for further films. You know, there's big talk now about renegotiating, and, you know, Marvel is notoriously stingy with their actors. And, you know, Downey made $50 million from Avengers, and they're not happy about that.
Wow.
But, you know, when you compare the kind of box office that either the Iron Man films or Avengers, any film that has Downey in it is going to make at least 3 times more than, say, your Captain Americas or your Thors or any other Marvel movie, because he is just so beloved as the character, and he just is so, you know, he's just born to play it. So, you know, my advice to them is just back up the Brinks truck to his house, give him whatever he wants, and you're going to make your money back. You know, they ended the film in such a way that you could say, okay, Iron Man's done, but I know they want him desperately for Avengers 2.
Oh, yeah.
So, you know, it's going to be very interesting. You know, the other actors, and I knew this was going to happen because, you know, the other actors, they were all kind of locked in for these crazy 6-movie deals, but they didn't have Downey. You know, they had him first. They paid him nothing for Iron Man because they didn't even want him. And now here it is. He's the face of their films. And they got to do what they got to do. That's my opinion.
Well, let me ask you a little bit about the other characters. Obviously, we talked about the Mandarin and how he is portrayed way differently in this film as he is in the comic book. But how about Killian? What can you tell me about Killian? Is he somebody...
I'm not as well versed in Killian as I am in the more classic villains.
Does he have powers? Do you know that?
I think so.
Okay.
But I could get, you know, bombarded by the fans here. I'm not positive. I did read Extremis, but it was about 5 or 6 years ago, and I remember the stuff I read in the 70s and the 80s better than the stuff I read now.
Right.
I just know that it's fairly faithful to the Extremis plot and the Extremis technology. But as far as Killian goes, I can't say in terms of how really, really faithful it is to him in the comic.
Well, I mean, I agree with you a lot in terms of how, now I don't know if I want to say disappointing, but it was a little bit of a letdown that, yes, I mean, don't get me wrong, I love it when somebody pulls a switcheroo or something you never expect. It's just that this one was kind of like, why couldn't he just be the big bad guy? Keep him, let him continue to be the big bad guy, because, again, he was so good at it. He looked and he sounded, and he had this aura around him that was like, wow.
Yeah.
Again, because I'm not a big comic book guy, people kept telling me about these magical rings he has. And it's like, oh, I can't wait for him to start using those rings on Tony. It's like, no, that's not going to happen.
Yeah, and you see, the weird thing, too, is they sort of establish in the first film this idea of the cult of the 10 rings, which is, I mean, anybody who reads the comic knows that they're talking about the Mandarin. And the group that captures Tony in the first film, they're the cult of the 10 rings. And you're saying to yourself, okay, they're working their way up to the Mandarin.
Plus, they even had the cameo of the scientist who was his prisoner with him.
Yeah.
That was like so cool. I'm like, oh, that's great.
Yeah, it was a nice little touch.
They worked it in. And obviously, you always have to have Stanley in there.
Oh, sure. Yeah. But no, it really was sad because they really pulled it off. And then to just go the other way with it when they had spent so much time trying to update him to make him a viable character in this day and age. Because he is Iron Man's Lex Luthor. He is Iron Man's Doctor Doom, his Green Goblin. And Iron Man doesn't have a really deep rogues gallery like somebody like Spider-Man or Batman. And so, you're saying to yourself, really? That's what you're going to do?
Oh, man. Yeah, I agree. I mean, the action was awesome. They were, on the level of what we've seen before. There's a certain standard that you expect. And yeah, the scene in the airplane, in the Air Force One, where they all have to kind of hold hands to get themselves down there, that was great. I just love that whole sequence.
Absolutely. And it was so interesting and different because you knew he couldn't carry them all. And then to come up with this this idea was just, I don't, it was terrific. Marvel really has the market cornered on these films. They've set the standard.
Now,
DC has a long way to go.
Now, I know you're placing it a little, not as good as one, but better than two. To me, unfortunately, I kind of would put it on the two category in terms of, and again, I can't tell you if it was just the Mandarin was such a letdown. That is what's making it, for me, brings it down a notch more than I wish it was. Because there were certain aspects that, to me were like, this is much better than two. But then it was like, oh, man, why did they do that? And then it was like, okay, well, hey, that's what they wanted to do, and they wanted to put a twist, and that's the way they did it. Now, what did you think of the Easter egg at the end?
Yeah, that was a nice little tag with Mark Ruffalo. What was disappointing about that was each of the sort of Easter egg endings.
Oh, I know what you're going to say. Yeah, go ahead.
It leads you to something else.
Yes.
This was kind of a nothing.
Right.
It was cute, but I had hoped and I had heard
Tease something.
I had heard that they were going to do some sort of a lead-in to Guardians of the Galaxy, which is their big blockbuster for next summer. And, no one knows anything about that. I mean, no one in the mainstream knows anything about that group. And I was kind of hoping they would go there. One of the rumors was that the kid in the movie was going to grow up to be the leader of the Guardians of the Galaxy because that film takes place in like 2045. So that could have, worked out, age-wise. But unless they're going to maybe pull that out as a, reveal in the actual film, again, that would have been great.
Well, this is something similar to, I guess what happened with, I think it was Avengers. There was for a short period of time, there was a rumor going around that Spider-Man was going to do a little cameo. And that kind of went nowhere.
Well, yeah, because I think whoever started that rumor didn't know what the hell they were talking about, since Marvel can't use Spider-Man.
They were going to try to cross somehow.
Yeah, it's just not going to happen, ever.
Now, the other thing is that I believe, I assume, I didn't read this anywhere, but the only reason they put Ruffalo is because after Avengers, the Hulk got this boost of popularity that I think they weren't expecting.
Right.
And it kind of said, all right, let's give him a little Hulk without having to do the effects.
Yeah, and that's another thing, it's a whole other conversation, but, this film marks the beginning of phase 2 for the Marvel Cinematic Universe. You have Iron Man 3, you have Captain America, you have Thor, and Guardians of the Galaxy, all which lead up to Avengers 2. And there's no mention of a Hulk movie. And a lot of people are disappointed at that.
Now, what is Ant-Man? Is that phase 2 or phase 3?
It's phase 3.
Wow.
And that is the only confirmed phase 3. There's a lot of talk about what characters are going to be in phase 3. And there's a lot of speculation that there'll be characters that we've never seen before on film. And I guess, I'm sure Avengers 2 is going to be enormous, and Joss Whedon and everything else. Then maybe you'll see a Hulk. They seem to think he works best in the Avengers setting with the group and having, people to bounce off of in terms of, in his own movies. There's not a lot going on in terms of the personality of the Hulk, but when he has other characters to bounce off of, there's something there. But Ruffalo was so good that I think that I personally, I think they should give him a shot.
Yeah, why not? And here's something else. Obviously Avengers, I think, might have been the first one, but this was also a 3D release.
Yeah.
And from what I remember, I liked it. I didn't mind. It wasn't obtrusive. It wasn't like weird or anything. It felt very mild, like the way it should feel, I guess. Mm-hmm. I hope they kind of continue doing them this way. Now, like I said before, I cannot really go gaga over this film. It's one of these things where I left the movie theater and I was like, okay, it was good. I liked it. But, it wasn't like, oh my God, I can't believe it. I kind of felt the same as I felt after Iron Man 2 in a way. And I was disappointed I was more disappointed at my disappointment than at the film because I wanted it to be the first, kick butt film of the summer. And financially, it is the first kick butt film of the summer. But, it doesn't really give that punch that I wanted. Furthermore, just like it's been happening with a lot of these big sci-fi action adventure type of films, this film was huge overseas. As a matter of fact, in China, in order to work out a deal for the censors to not, crack down too much on the violence and the subject matter and let them air the film, they had made a deal, I remember, where they would shoot an additional scene, a very small additional scene. And this has happened before, and we talked about it before. And this is an additional scene with Chinese actors having to do with something in China. And it would only air when this film was being played in China. In the US or in the rest of the international market, the scene was cut down dramatically to just a couple of seconds of Tony being treated in the hospital. But, when they're fixing his arc reactor, when they're basically removing his arc reactor, it was thrown at the end of the film. But apparently there is like a 3 to 4 minute long scene of, these doctors getting ready to perform this operation and talking about it, and then actually, performing it, and there's some interaction, all of it in Chinese, which was, like I said before, specially made for the Chinese moviegoers. Now, this has not shown up on the Blu-ray, but it is available on YouTube if you search for, Iron Man 3 deleted scene, China, or something like that, you can find it. It's very weird in terms of it doesn't fit. The pacing doesn't fit. It's a very slowly paced scene. I don't know how they're going to eventually release it, because maybe they'll include it as part of some other future set. But as far as I can tell, it was not on the Blu-ray. But it's interesting, again, how these modern, gigantic blockbuster type of films are customizing their films. Not only are they translating them, obviously, like they've always done, but now they're adding scenes that only certain countries will be able to see, kind of to entice the business of that country. We talked about it before on a movie like Pacific Rim, how, when you have locations that are, foreign locations, people from foreign countries like to see their own countries featured in films, and that helps, the box office, the local box office of that country. But now we're talking about, adding storyline elements to it. It's really getting out there. This is like beyond product placement. This is country placement. It's amazing.
Right. And I don't think that, for me personally, I don't think I'll ever in my life get the kind of punch that I got with Avengers.
Oh.
That to me, that was the film.
Well, here's what I'm afraid of. I'm afraid of that we are now coming to an area in these Marvel films where they're no longer origin stories we're dealing with. Now, granted, right. Avengers is not an origin story, but it's the first time that you see these people together. So in a way, it's kind of an origin working together story. So unless they start introducing new characters, completely fresh new characters that we haven't seen in films yet, I hope we don't start getting this Iron Man 2, Iron Man 3 aftertaste after we see the next Thor and the next Cap America.
I can assure you that Avengers is going to introduce new characters to the team. That's already been discussed, and I'm pretty sure I know the ones that they're going to be putting in. So, I don't know if that's going to help the film. I think we're going to just start seeing... Again, it could be also a failsafe if Downey leaves, but even if Downey doesn't leave, I think they're still going to introduce these characters.
You think they would recast Downey?
I think that would be a mistake. I think that they talk about it as if it's a possibility, but I think that they need to hold off. I think you should just drop the character for a certain amount of time before you go rebooting him.
Well, I understand how you feel, but I'm saying, what would Marvel do? Do you think they would just keep it going for money's sake?
Maybe, but I think they have so many characters in their arsenal that I think, they could get away with not having that Downey Iron Man sort of blockbuster guy. They may introduce somebody. Don't forget.
Tony's on vacation?
Yeah, and don't forget, before the movie, who the hell knew who Iron Man was?
Oh, yeah.
I mean, yeah, you did. Even though you didn't read the comics, you knew who he was because you're a geek.
Right. The world, to the normal person, comprises of Batman, Superman, and Spider-Man. And that's it.
Exactly. So I honestly, all I can say is I hope that they wait a while, if they don't get Downey, to recast the character.
Well, let me ask you a quick question. And I know maybe this has been talked about before. How bad would it be to take the Iron Patriot? And all of a sudden, he's now Iron Man.
Yeah, I mean, he did become Iron Man in the comic for a while.
He did.
I don't know if he could carry his own film.
I didn't know that.
He did, yeah. Personally, I think Iron Patriot works better as a sidekick. And I don't know that they would, go there. He had his own comic briefly, as War Machine. And as a matter of fact, in the comic, the character of Colonel Rhodes never became the Iron Patriot. The Iron Patriot is actually a whole other character who was played by, you're not going to believe this, but Norman Osborn, who is the Green Goblin, was the Iron Patriot as a villain.
Wow.
So, it's kind of weird. But yeah, I just don't think that that would go.
The other thing that's a little different in this film is that by the time you reach the end of this film, it's almost like they want to give you the possibility that this might be the end of
Yeah.
Tony, because they conclude the movie in terms of, there's a sequence where like the vice president's arrested because he was in cahoots with maybe trying to get the president killed.
Right.
And Tony, they remove the shrapnel from his chest so he no longer needs some of the devices that he has in his chest. And they
Right.
do this whole montage at the end where they show you all these pictures of all the movies together. And it's like, I wonder if they did that on purpose.
I think they did it as a way of saying, yes, this could be the end. We may not want it to be the end, but, this whole series of films might go away for a while. They may push hard to get Downey to do Avengers 2. And, Iron Man, comes and goes as an Avenger. They all do. So if you could keep, just adding and add. It's kind of like X-Men. I mean, yes, you sort of have your Wolverine characters.
Well, it's a comic book world. You can't have a comic book where every, 300 characters are in every comic book.
Right.
You can't.
So,
it's insane.
exactly.
As ridiculous as the stories are to begin with, because it's science fiction fantasy, you can't do
Right.
that literally.
Right. So you could just, say he's, not participating at the moment.
He's got the flu.
Yeah, exactly. And, Iron Man and all the other characters, they come and go. And that's the reality of the comic. So it could carry over to the films.
Yeah. All right. Well, again, I think we kind of both feel the same way. I think you're a little more happy with it than I am.
Yeah, I'm a little more forgiving.
But don't get me wrong. As much as I was disappointed at the Mandarin thing, I want more. I want to keep them going. But, we'll see where they go with this. One more item I'd like to add is that since we've recorded this show, there has been news about negotiations between Robert Downey and, I guess, Marvel or Disney concerning the future of his employment. And apparently, as of now, he has agreed to do at least 2 more Avenger films. So that would be Avenger 2 and Avenger 3. Obviously, this is a multi-million-dollar deal, and no word yet on whether this will at some point maybe include standalone future Iron Man films. Well, Steve, thank you very much for joining me today on our Iron Man 3 discussion. And hopefully we will get together again and go over, because we have lots of films coming out and so many more TV shows. So on behalf of everybody here at Geekfest Rants, I'd like to thank everybody for listening, and we will see you here next time at Geekfest Rants. Bye-bye, everybody.
Ladies, children, sheep. Some people call me a terrorist. I consider myself a teacher. Lesson number 1. Heroes. There is no such thing.
I
Stop! That's not funny.